learning about science and the hunt for answers to big questions. But if a scientist is willing to meet me halfway, as it were, and communicate in a way that is true to the science, and yet offers up terms and analogies that would work at a cocktail party or over the kitchen table, then I think it can work. But there is that sweet spot between where the science is, where the pictures are, and where the PI is as far as dealing with the media.
Great. And then as a follow-up question, how do you make complex topics easy to understand?
Well, the dirty little secret, maybe not such a secret, is that I am a history major. And so I really don't know anything about science. So Mark, if you want to rescind my honorary membership right now, I'm giving you the opportunity. It was a big mistake. I understand it. So I stumbled into the job of science correspondent at CNN in 1992 because, frankly, at the time, I was more interested in CNN than science. I went to Georgetown, studied history, did journalism, and frankly, I just didn't get taught by great science teachers. I got a lot of the periodic table and got a little bit turned off somewhere along the way and decided I wanted to pursue this. And so when I found out that CNN was looking for a science correspondent, I thought, wow, that's a great way to get into CNN. And maybe I can fake the science. And so I went to CNN for a 2-day interview, at which time they gave me both a written and oral exam on science, which, as you can imagine, the history major who had been chasing around fires in Boston and local news, I flunked horribly. And so I got to the president of CNN and I said, I'd really like to be your science correspondent. And he said, well, obviously you don't know crap about science. And I said, well, that's true. And I said, and that was when I kind of threw the Hail Mary pass. And I said, well, actually, you don't want somebody who knows too much about science. You want somebody who's not afraid of science and is willing to engage in a conversation with a scientist that gets them to the CNN audience. The CNN audience, after all, we have to assume is about a high school educated person, right? So that was, I thought, a little bit of a line of BS maybe to get a job, but it turned out to be very true. And so what I have done all along is I have done a lot of homework. I had this amazing 17-year stint at CNN where I learned a lot about science from Nobel laureates. What a privileged science education I got. But all the while, I've never forgotten that, I'm the history major inside. And so what I do, that's a long way of answering your question, Heather, is I never am afraid to be, the history major with scientists and just say, look, I don't get that. You start over. Tell me a basic term, and let's come up with a way to make an analogy that is, as again, we don't want to dumb it down. We just want to simplify it in a way that people can grasp. And that's what I try to do all the time.
That leads into my next question. It's sort of on the other end of the spectrum of balancing accuracy with accessibility. How do you do that?
Well, it's always difficult to write a script that remains true to the science and yet accessible to a broad audience. This is where I live. This is my life, and I'm unusual in the journalistic endeavor in that I have learned a very important lesson from scientists. I believe it's important for me to share aspects of my story before they get published or released. Many journalists are very sacrosanct about this. They refuse to, run things by people they've asked questions about. I think that's stupid. I really do. And the idea is that, well, if you tell somebody what you're going to say, they'll try to make you change it. Blah 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 blah. I think it's nonsense. I cannot tell you, like when I could do a Nova, an hour-long science thing, I will go through every single line. I will call up the scientist that I have interviewed, and I will have written something based on the interview and our meeting, and then we'll sit down kind of line by line and come up with a way to tell it jointly. And I found that to be a very successful thing because a lot of times scientists see the script and they go, "Oh gosh, you're forgetting X, Y, and Z." And so we work through it and we try to honor those details without bogging it down in so much information that a television audience would kind of get left behind. So I think I really do believe it's a partnership. It's very important for all of you in that room to understand that there are people out there like me who want to meet you halfway and work with you to tell these complex ideas.
And now I want to open it up to the audience. I have more questions here to ask, but we really want to get to your questions. So if you have any questions, you'll need to come up to the microphone so that Miles can hear you. And please do that if you have any questions. Looks like we have Nancy from Minnesota.
Yes, one question I would like to ask is about global warming. Not that we haven't always heard about it, but taking a longer view, where do you see where we are? Is there more acceptance? What has been your way of handling it in terms of trying to present things, and where do you think we are on that curve?
Oh boy, we could spend the whole session on this one. I think we're moving closer to a point where mainstream journalists are kind of getting it, but it's hard. I remember in I believe it was about 1998 at CNN, doing an hour-long film on climate change then. And every assertion that I had from an IPCC peer-reviewed scientist, they were insisting I go out to the Cato Institute or something and try to get a response. And I tried to explain to them, well, no, I did explain to them that was wrong. And that, so what you have to understand about journalism is we're all taught to do, on the one hand, on the other hand, journalism. It's this kind of, balance the story out notion, right? And it comes, frankly, because we cover in mainstream journalism, they cover so much politics, right? So you interview the Republican, you go get the Democrat. So that kind of template gets overlaid on a lot of things in journalism, including science, which we all know doesn't work, because to put in somebody who's part of the whole IPCC, a huge process of peer review and understanding and review and so forth, against somebody who's been paid by Exxon to say something, and say, on the other hand, this guy says so, such and such, is a false equivocation. And so I fought long and hard on that film to shrink down those opposing views, and it was definitely 70-30, but it still was not the way I feel it should be. I think it's very analogous to what happened with tobacco. You had the Surgeon General's report, tobacco industry created the Tobacco Institute, and they put out all that phony science, and it took a while for the media to kind of get it. And eventually we all came to a consensus that, cigarettes are bad for you. And then you didn't have to go out and get somebody to say, no, actually, they might be good for you. Doctors smoke Camels or whatever, all those things. And so I think we're now finally getting to that point in journalism, maybe not on Fox News, but I can't speak for them. That's a different animal entirely. But I do think.
Don't worry. Give him a minute.
The mainstream slow. Are you guys still there?
Yep. Sorry, you froze up for just a second.
Okay, good. I'm still with you.
Okay, we can hear you.
All right, so I finished that. I hope you got. Did you lose me the whole time? I was really on a roll.
The last thing we heard was Fox News.
Fox News.
And it froze up. Ooh. Kind of grassy knoll there. All right, Roger Ailes was listening. All I can say is I think the mainstream media is getting better. It's a slow process. We all collectively, you in that room, me, we have to keep, kind of fighting this battle, chipping away at it. The evidence is so overwhelming at this point that you get to a point where you can't deny it anymore. I mean, and there's still people who believe we have a flat Earth, right? So there's going to be that, but I think we're getting there.
Okay, next question.
You're in an interesting position as a journalist, and that is on the one side is the scientific community, and on the other side is sort of the general public, and you're the thread through which things flow. But those two groups have sort of different views fundamentally of what's going on. Everyone in this room knows, as people who do rational research, that there's a certain uncertainty in everything that we do, and that we're always concerned about how confident we are about things. But in the general public, for better or for worse, what has been conveyed to them by their education generally and by the media and many times is that all this stuff is quite certain. So how do you deal with that? Two different cultures here, you know? How do you?
Well, yeah, this is a real problem, because no scientist will stare you straight in the face with the camera rolling and say with any certainty about anything. Because of course, there's always, science is a process. It's not a conclusion, and you're going to. There's always some uncertainty, no matter how much evidence is piled up. This is a nuance that is often overlooked by people. Here's what I think is really important in our world, and this is way beyond our pay grade, but it's something we should all be thinking about. You know, as a card-carrying history major, I think it's important that people like me, who are not necessarily on the STEM track in the world, understand a little more about the process and understand the value of a peer-reviewed study versus a press release from, you know, a petrochemical company. These things are important to understand, and it's not something that's, you know, I know there are courses out there, but I think liberal arts education should include more science in a way that is accessible to the history majors, at least to give people a basic scientific literacy so they can really assess these things. When a scientist says, well, you know, climate change is happening, humans are causing it, of course, there is some chance maybe that's not the case, which is, you know, technically right as a scientist. And of course, that's the thing that in the media, we tend to can take out of context, and people misunderstand because they don't understand what science is all about. So I think we need to come up with ways in our world, and this would help us in so many other ways, including funding for science. I mean, the fact that we have you know, people on the science committee in Congress, in the House of Representatives, who don't believe in evolution is a problem in this country, and we have to move the ball forward here on our understanding of what science is and what we know to be true factually based on science. And I can't fix that. I mean, I can do my little stories, and you can, you know, help me with that and tell your stories through me. But we need to come up with a way. Maybe some of you guys should run for Congress. That would be good. You know, it'd be good to have a few more scientists in Washington, frankly. I mean, we don't have them anymore. We used to have citizens who were representatives of all of us. We don't have that anymore. That might be a good thing for starters.
Okay, we have another question.
You talked about how you're kind of partnering with scientists to communicate scientific discoveries to the public. Are you ever concerned about the desire for publicity distorting the scientific process? The scientists may be sensationalizing some of their results and kind of catering to you. Do you worry about that?
That never happens, right? Yes, I'm always concerned about that, always. And I'm always asking questions about funding sources, lack of funding, waiting for funding. What's going on the funding side? I'm always asking that question, because that can reveal a lot. And I frequently will, I was talking to you about that kind of, script review process. A lot of times I will go in a peer review, using peer review is a good thing. I will go to peers and say, hey, how does this sound to you? Is this right? This is what I heard from so-and-so, and can get some different perspective on it. So yes, it's really important to, hold on to your wallet when you're talking to some people, because there are people out there. I mean, let's face it, we have, diminished, the pie is diminishing for you guys. It's ridiculous how science is so hard pressed for funding right now, frankly, and in that kind of an environment, it's human nature to try to um, maybe overstate some claims, and so it's very important to be aware of that. A healthy dose of skepticism is always good in journalism, and I always try to keep that.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and then we're going to do the induction ceremony.
As a person that's worked his career in trying to communicate science education, our mission in Sigma Xi is to promote and communicate science education. And I wonder if you might have any suggestions about how Sigma Xi might further that part of our mission with the general audience.
Well, I think Sigma Xi is on the right track. I think my experience just in dealing with Heather and the way you are present in social networks is excellent. Here's the thing. I was at CNN for 17 years, and we had 8 people total in the science and technology unit. And there's kind of a long story as to how that happened. Basically, the only reason there was a science and technology unit at CNN was back in 1980 when CNN first started. AT&T approached Ted Turner and said, Ted, we would like to put science and technology on CNN. We're going to pay you X number of millions of dollars. Do 3 stories a week and a weekly show. And Ted was like, I'm into science. And so because at that point they were putting Xanfer the fluke guy on, and they barely had it. They were barely making payroll. And so for the longest time, science was directly linked to income for the network. And then eventually that went away. Those direct sponsorships and the show went away and so forth. And so at that point we were cast adrift. And it wasn't long, before science went away as a unit. So we all got fired one day, and we were the last bastion really at the networks. There's nobody left at the networks who considers himself a science correspondent, aside from the New York Times. There are a couple science reporters here and there, but as far as doing it very seriously, excuse me. The science departments at the newspapers are all but gone. And so you've lost, there are fewer conduits to tell your story. The good news side of this bad story is that with social networking, with Twitter, with Facebook, with whatever, pick your Snapchat, whatever you like, there are so many ways you can tell your own story. And I would submit to you, without sounding, I don't want to get too high on my horse here, but if you are inclined to do this, I feel like you must do it. It's not a choice. There are some scientists, we can all agree, who are not comfortable in the public light, and we should leave them in the lab and let them do their science. That's great. We love that. But there are some scientists who have the ability and the desire to communicate, and it's so important for them to push themselves out there. And, I remember, when Carl Sagan was on The Tonight Show, there were practically bullets in his back from other scientists who thought he was, doing the wrong thing by popularizing science. It is incumbent upon you, and I'll help you as much as I can, one story at a time, one documentary at a time. It is incumbent upon you to think of ways to reach out to the public to tell your story, because the funding picture is not going to get better unless we find ways to tell this story. You guys, all of you have great stories to tell, and you can do it with a few tweets if you think about it. I know you're busy trying to get the next proposal written and get the next experiment done, but this just sort of has to be a part of what you do, unfortunately. There are scientists out there who are doing Kickstarter campaigns for research, but that's really what's come to. And as bad as that sounds, that forces them to explain to the public and engage with the public on what they're doing. And I think it's really important for you all to think about how you can do that as well. I'm not saying doing Kickstarter campaigns, but find ways to tell your own story. And I as now a member of your club, you can call me anytime. I'd be happy to help you with this. I mean that.
Miles, there's always one more experiment, right? For a
Yes.
we said one more question, but one more question.
Pardon me.
We obviously aren't the greatest communicators, but what we're wondering, and I think is there a place for a go-to, highly respected scientific organization within the press world that you could come to and say, I have a problem with X. I need an expert that I can access very quickly and give me some straight answers that are not politically skewed or in any way questionable. They represent today's science. Is there room for an organization like that? And if so, there's one here raising its hand.
I think here's the key in this, because there are a few other organizations that nibble around on this. AAAS does a little bit of this. Here's the most important thing, and here's I'd be happy to help you. This goes to the teachable moment when the hurricane is hitting the coast. You know, there's a big one bearing down right now, right? You have to be ready that moment. And you have to have made a relationship with network bookers, with, like I say, there's not so many correspondents anymore, but you have to have that kind of relationship so that you're in the Rolodex when that happens, and you have to be available, like right away. And these are the teachable moments when it starts to melt down at Fukushima or whatever the case may be. The networks. I have this kind of rule that the desire for facts is inversely proportional to their availability. Just think about that, right? I mean, when something happens, when the plane crashes and it's a smoldering hole in the ground, CNN will be on 24/7 for days, and we don't know anything about what happened, right? But we have to fill that time. That, unfortunately, is the teachable moment. So what do? Do we speculate on what happened to the plane, or do we inform the public about how an investigation works? Or if you're talking about the hurricane, you don't know what's happening with this particular hurricane, but is this an opportunity to talk about the interesting research on climate change versus the severity of hurricanes? You have to be ready in that moment, though, to help fill that time and make it smarter, because they will fill the time no matter what. And they'll find somebody. They'll find any living, breathing soul with a pulse to get on TV and say any gosh darn thing. And then some of the stuff will make you insane. I know it's done it. You've thrown the things at the TV when you hear it because it's nonsense. And there are people who get on there and spew it out absolutely unapologetically with no shame. So get in the game. I'd be happy to help you if you want to build a catalog of experts. We could make some that would be available to do it. You got to be close to an uplink, all the things that are little details like that. But it can be done. But it's really important that you're fast and in the game when it's happening, because that's where the narrative gets formed in those first day or so. Scientists typically, you're used to the peer review process. We're talking months. You want to wait a little while to find out a little more. You sort of have to get in the game in a place where you're uncomfortable, which is like right while it's happening. But it can be done. Trust me.
Great. Okay. And now we want to have President Mark Peoples show you your honorary member certificate.
Whoa. Excellent. And where's that check? Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person, and it was. I look forward to being at another meeting next year or something, whenever you invite me. But I guess I'm in the club now, so I can just come and hang out with the armchair and the smoking jacket. Where is that club anyway?
So Miles, before I present you with this, our chemistry members here wanted to make the point that today is Mole Day. Do you know what Mole Day is, being a history major?
No, I actually don't. What is that? What is that?
It's 1023. That's Avogadro's number. 1.023 times 10 third. Right?
You lost me at Pi Day. So
We can all learn, right?
Yeah, thank you. See, I learned something.
Okay. So Sigma Xi, the Scientific Research Society, and the Board of Directors has elected Miles O'Brien as the 49th honorary member of Sigma Xi for life, for free, for reporting on science, technology, and aerospace in a way that has greatly increased the public understanding of and appreciation for science. This certificate commemorates his selection and is presented on October 23rd, 2015 in Kansas City, Missouri. Congratulations.
And in Little Rock, Arkansas. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. You like me. You like me.
Keep doing what you're doing.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great meeting. I'm sorry I can't be there.
Okay, next November we'll be in Atlanta. We'll look for you.
All right. We'll be there.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Miles.
Okay. Bye-bye, Heather.
Bye.